I sell.
Madam Mayor, it's 6 o'clock.
Not yet, I'm waiting.
No, not her ticker didn't tick.
Okay.
Paging Mr. Robinson.
Oh, look who's
It
here.
doesn't ring.
Hey.
My favorite guy in green. How are you, bud?
Your timer doesn't tick.
It just turns off. It doesn't ring.
It better ring.
It doesn't ring. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this Tuesday, April 30th, Electric Utilities City Commission meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo,
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell,
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy.
On the
Absent.
elevator.
Oh, absent for the roll. Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge, led by the Vice Mayor.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Any additions, deletions, or reordering?
Not that I know of, Madam Mayor.
All right, then we're going to move right on to the presentation of the Electric Utilities Quarterly Performance Review and Update.
Good evening. Ed Liberty, Director of Electric Utilities, supported by Walt Gill, my Assistant Director for Transmission Distribution. I'm going to go through some prepared items today, and of course, if there's questions, I'll take questions, as will Walt. Okay, this is what we refer to as our significant items report, and we go through a list of some of the things that are significant activities, significant issues that we've covered in the first quarter, and some significant events as well. Starting with significant activities, scorecard development continues to evolve, and you'll be seeing another version of that tonight, similar to what you saw at the end of the first quarter. So we want to get into this routine of going through the scorecard quarterly with our board of directors, if you will. So that's underway, and we're going to go through that in a few slides. System hardening and reliability improvement project, I'm going to turn it over to Walt, who will give you an update on that.
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, Walt Gill, Assistant Director, Transmission and Distribution. What we have accomplished so far is we've got a lot of engineering and design done on the system. We do have contractors in the field as we speak right now, working our porous performance circuits, and then we'll move in through the list as we presented in the last presentation with you. 7th Avenue substation is approximately 98% design, 99% design. That is our standard substation footprint. It's a 4-bay, which is actually expandable out to an 8-bay as well. And we'll move into that later on in the month.
If there's any questions as we're going, just feel free to stop us, and we'll chat about these.
Okay.
Were there any questions on system hardening and reliability improvement? So we'll just keep moving. One of the things that we spent some time on formalizing and looking over was our power plant dispatch. One of the things that we found was that the plant was running more than we thought that it should, meaning it was being dispatched by the pool at a relatively high rate. And as we looked at the data closer, we recognized that the cost to operate the unit or the units at the power plant were higher than we thought they should be. Rather, they were higher than had been reported earlier to the power pool, meaning that we were being undercompensated for the amount that the plant was being run. The net effect of that, it was causing the plant to run more, we believe, than it should have. And we went back through the history, and it appears that that data was changed about 5 years ago from a higher number to a lower number, which had the net effect of causing the plant to run more. We have done a pretty good review of our costs, what they should be, reported on these unit data sheets, and we have resubmitted those to the power pool, and we're waiting for them to review them and then get back to us. It appears that anytime you want to lower your number, they're more than glad to let you lower the number. But if you want to raise the number, meaning get paid more for every time you start, they need to look at that more closely. We don't know if they'll accept it or reject it. I expect that they'll ask us some questions, and we'll probably get the new numbers. So our plant would be called to run less than it is today.
Okay.
We also spent some time, since we started on January 1 with the new OUC contract, our staff, together with Vantage, who helped us get the contract in place, now audits those monthly bills. Since it's a new contract for us, a new contract for OUC, a new nomination process each month, we wanted to make sure that it was working the way that we had intended to. So that's been underway. We did find one billing error for, it was February or March, which when we reviewed more closely with OUC, they agreed that it was a billing error and they reversed that. So that's a good sign. So that's a good thing to do, to audit these things, at least in the early days of the project, to make sure that everything is going the way that the parties had intended to.
For how much, Ed?
It's about $60,000 error,
Okay.
which when you're looking at a couple of $2.5 million a month, that's not a big number, but it's still
still a big
$60,000, right? It's $60,000 of our money is a lot of money.
Yes.
No ill intent, or it was just a billing error on the part of OUC. They readily corrected it, and no problem at all. They've actually been very good, very easy to work with. As you know, you approved the bundled gas capacity and gas sale with the PESCO, Peninsula Energy Services, through Florida Gas Utility, who we've been members with since 1992, as I understand it. And so that's kicked off. So May 1 is the first day of the contract for that, when that gas will begin to flow to PESCO. The work on our second tie line on a conceptual basis continues. We're now down to 3 or 4 different options. As I said before, I'd rather not get into a public discussion of the potential routes, at least in terms of specific properties, but we do have upwards of about 4 different options that we're looking at. We were planning to bring that forward at the end of May. It looks like that will probably come forward in July. We wanted to give them a little bit more time to do some more work on the conceptual to really force rank them better than we had so far.
Commissioner Robinson?
Just, do you have a number that we would,
For planning purposes now, we're using a number of 15 to 20 million.
and that's going to come from,
It's going to come from, in terms of where the number is going to come from?
no, where the,
We have a number of things that that are coming up. So we've increased our net income, so we're making more money to the bottom line before we take our final expenses out. So we're doing well. By negotiating the power contract, we got to about $4.8 million a year in savings on that. We have about $1.3 million in debt service that rolls off later this year from the Stanton project. And once we do have a second tie line, we'll be able to begin retirements of portions of the power plant that we have today, that which will create savings to pay for the second tie line. Remembering that the purpose of the tie line is to give us a redundant feed into the city, which then negates the need to have a power plant to back up the single tie line. We won't need that power plant. So we're really at end of life of that power plant. So the savings that we'll recover from retiring portions of the plant will go towards financing, helping to finance that new tie line.
Commissioner Harney?
I recognize and acknowledge the rationale behind shuttering the plant potentially, or parts of the plant if we get a tie line. I just want to say though that should be a policy decision that we make when we get there. There are a lot of people who are concerned about that, who I think would like to see those discussions play out in public up here on the dais. I don't want people to feel like that's a foregone conclusion at this point. That's all.
I'll point out that that's a good plan. The plant may retire itself before then. It's 1968 to 1978, and it's costing us a lot of money to run it. Whether to have a tie line or not is really not a big decision for us to make, because we have to have one. The alternative to a tie line is to building a new plant. So if we spend $15 to $20 million on a tie line, we avoid spending maybe upwards of $100+ million on a new plant. So it's not a decision as to whether we spend 15 or 20 million or not. That plant is done. And that's really where we're at. And I know there's implications. It's obvious a policy decision. We'll be back to talk more about it. But that plant is done. Any questions on that?
I think we all pretty much
Yeah.
feel the same way, that we have to have a discussion about it, go through the pieces and whatever, and see what the plan is from that point. We haven't made any, I understand what your realistic assessment is of the plant. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But again, we have to have a policy discussion about what happens from there.
Next item on the list, the significant activity that we dealt with was the failure of our TPTL1 transformer. That's one of the two main transformers at our main yard. We actually have three large transformers in the city that step down 138 to 26 kV to support the city. This was one of the three, but it's more importantly, it's one of the two at the main yard. So during the period of time that transformer was out for replacement, we had the city operating on a contingency, which we had to cure before we got into the real heat. Fortunately, as you all know, we were able to find a replacement transformer thanks to Jacksonville Electric Authority, JEA. Just kudos to them in the spirit of municipal power. They gave us, actually they gave us the production slot. We paid for it at their cost. We were able to buy that transformer and have it delivered here. It actually cost a few dollars more because it had to be delivered 6 hours further south than Jacksonville. But if it were not for JEA willing to step up and let us take that transformer that they had on order, we'd be in dire straits this summer.
I don't know if the city manager told you, but I was able to thank them in person up in Tallahassee.
Oh, excellent, very nice. So we're trying to come up with some way to recognize them as well, and send them some stuff.
I'll
maybe
help you work on
fruit
it, whatever it
baskets or
is.
whatever we're allowed to send. Maybe some sand from our beach to their beach. But great thanks to them. Also note that the efforts of the team paid off, and that was completed not only ahead of schedule, but under the $1.5 million that was authorized. So Walt is working to finish that up and get the last of the numbers together. We'll be able to report on that down the road, but I think it's substantially under the 1.5.
It's around the 1 million range.
Excellent job.
And we were able to capitalize it. Which of course ate into our capital budget, but didn't have much of an effect on the operating budget. Next item that we're looking at very closely is the FMPA solar. As you all know, we took 10 megawatts in the first FMPA solar project under a power purchase agreement. We've indicated an interest consistent with what was discussed here, additional amounts. They're putting together a second project. They now have the bids in. They're evaluating them. The pricing has not been released, but what I've been told is that it's more attractive than the first phase that we were a part of. So we've indicated an interest in 10 to 20 megawatts in the coming months. Really, in the coming month or so, we'll be finalizing our recommendation on how much additional we're going to take. We're doing the modeling now to see how much that should be. And depending on what the other participants want to do, there may be an option to not do a 20-year level term, we may be able to start out lower and then have an escalator built in. So FMPA is looking at that closely to see what's in the best interest of FMPA as a whole, and then talking with each one of the potential participants to see what they would like.
What are some of the challenges? I know when we had talked about it, when you first brought phase one to us to speak about it, I was like, get as much as we can. I mean, what are the benefits to getting more, or what's the right number? How do you judge that?
The way that we judge that is we build models, and those models have every hour of the year for a number of years modeled in terms of what's the minimum amount of energy that we needed, the maximum amount, and then the average. And then we layer in what we call our entitlements. So our entitlements are the power that comes from St. Lucie and Stanton. And then we modify that for some assumption on availability of those units, because even though they're good units, they may not run all of the time. They have breakdowns as well. And then we start to layer in our own 1.7 megawatt solar project, the output from that, the 10 megawatt PPA that we're already a party to. And we start to look at the model, it actually changes color. It's like a heat map to show us when we have space for this power and when we don't have space for the power. So we've built a decent model. We're now going to incorporate into it some more recent history on how Stanton is actually run on an hourly basis, because even though our entitlement, for example, is 11 megawatts, it doesn't run at 11 megawatts all the time. It runs sometimes at 11 megawatts, but overnight much lower. But that's not a problem because solar wouldn't be producing overnight. But then it does have its outages, whether they're planned outages or forced outages. And not all the time would it run at full load. So we have to look at all of that and say on an hourly basis, what's the right amount for us to have? We don't want to be so long on energy that we've bought more than we can use.
But now Gulfstream current energy is 24/7.
Right. Correct. But I believe the planned retirement date for Stanton is around 2027. So we have to look well into the future. Typically in utility resource planning, you're looking 20 years into the future. So you may be a little bit long in the early years, but then you're doing well down the road. So we look at that very closely. We also need capacity, which is a valuable commodity that we have to have by regulation.
Commissioner Hardy?
To what extent do tax credits make this economical? And to what extent do you know that those tax credits will be available in the future?
The tax credits make this extremely economical. It helps the developer or the owner of the project decrease their real net cost of investment and therefore increase their return to their allowable or their desirous level of return. So we enjoy lower pricing because those tax credits are inuring to the benefit of the developer.
Do these tax credits that the developer is using to lower basically his basis in this project, are these tax credits going to expire next year?
They do begin to phase out gradually. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what that phase out is, but I think starting next year they start stepping down in a laddered approach. I just don't know off the top of my head what that is.
So if they step down and it becomes more costly for developers to deliver this kind of stuff to us in the future, it might behoove us to take advantage of this while the tax credits are available. We know that Washington doesn't always keep in place policies that make sense.
That's a very good point. So what we've seen happen is as the industry has gotten to the brink of these tax credits expiring, they then get extended. But we can't live from cycle to cycle.
Right.
But what's happening, though, on the other side of the equation, on the cost side, the equipment costs are coming down. So the developers are getting much more efficient in how they lay out the plants and how they construct them to bring down the cost of installation. And then the manufacturers of the panels and the inverters, but particularly the panels, are driving down the prices as well. So the panels are getting cheaper. At the same time, the tax credits will be sunsetting. So I think they're working within that band. There's so much demand for renewable energy and so much creativity going into production of these panels that the prices are coming down. There's no guarantee, though, that they'll keep coming down, but they're substantially lower than they were 10 years ago and lower than they were 2 years ago.
Right. And I mean, it could be the case that some of this demand that led to the capacity of these suppliers to drive down costs and prices for people who are buying this stuff could have been linked to the tax credit. And if the tax credit gets less economical, the demand dries up. The incentive for the people to produce the stuff cheaply, it just gets more difficult over the long term. I would just like to see us take advantage of it to the extent that we can, but I recognize that this is a complex set of variables to think about in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, aren't we buying it fixed? The first phase one, that one we got, right, we negotiated the same price long far out.
Correct. We
Then
got a
you mentioned-
20-year fixed price.
Okay, so we have a 20-year fixed price, which is, we won't get that from OUC, as terrific as they are.
It's a very competitive number. It's a trade secret to the developer / owner of the project, so I can't mention it publicly. What we have said publicly that it's under $40 a megawatt hour, which is 4 cents per kilowatt hour. What I've been told so far about this next project is it'll be even further below that.
Wow. But it might behoove us to do it in the manner, based on what Commissioner Hardy was saying, though, too, to buy it outright rather than renegotiate each year or whatever to get that fixed rate up front so that we sort of can count on it.
Well, I think what we have to balance is
How much we're going to need.
how much we're going to need, and we also take into account our load growth. So, and what we've found is that our peaks are kind of leveling out, but the total volume is increasing slightly. So we are seeing slight increases in the amount of power that we're sending out to our customers, but the peaks are not. So we're not fighting, but our marketplace, our customers are becoming more efficient at the same time that they're growing. There's more of them, but they're also becoming more efficient. So we're looking at that. And then we know that if Stanton does retire on schedule, or in the unforeseen we don't know the answer yet, if Stanton were to retire early, which is a possibility, but they have not changed the retirement date. There's no indication that they intend to change it yet, but I know they're looking at it. If it were to retire early, we would need to fill that void.
On the load growth front, once we legalize accessory dwelling units,
Point of order.
a ton of load growth.
I was wondering how he's going to do that.
All right, I'm sorry.
I'm going to start charging you for that. 4 cents every time you say that. Okay, go ahead.
Per syllable.
So that's where we are in solar. So we're evaluating that, and we'll be coming back to you, within another month or two, to move ahead with that next tranche. I can tell you that directionally, between our own solar project and FMPA Solar 1, that should get us to around 6%, 7% of our total energy coming from solar. If we do another 10 megawatts, that would take us up to about 13 or 14%. I'd like to get to 15% because it's a nice round number, right?
I want to be up in double digits.
Right, but we have to keep in mind that we still have these base entitlements that we don't want to have to turn away something we've already paid for,
Of course.
and sell it in the wholesale market at a lower price. Maybe take a little bit of a loss on that piece. But overall, we're headed in the right direction. 40+% of our energy today is coming from nuclear, which is carbon free, plus another 0.5% or so plus from our own project, and that'll go up another 5 or 6%. So about a year from now, a little over a year from now, we should be about 45+% carbon free, and another about 10% of it would be coal, and the balance would be natural gas based. So we have from an environmental perspective, we have a pretty healthy, pretty good mix of fuels, and we're well hedged across multiple commodities, with coal, natural gas, oil, and growing rapidly in solar.
Excellent.
We did submit the first draft of our 2020 budget, O&M budget, and our CIP capital plan that's been submitted. We do expect to make multiple revisions to that before we actually get to the point where it comes forward to you, but the first run at it has been turned over to finance and is in their hands, as well as the forecast for what we think will come in this year. That wasn't just our department, all departments had to do it, so I'm not saying we did something special. Everybody has done that.
We know.
Yeah.
You got your paperwork
Yeah.
in first.
We're stepping up our game on system operations training. We did send all of our operators to FRCC training in Tampa. That was well received. I think they appreciated the investment that we're making in their education and their craft, and helping train them, and also helping us make sure that we have well-trained people in system operations. We're well underway with our pole attachment contract negotiations. They're going okay, better with some than others, and I'll come back to that in a second. And we are also well underway with our new warehouse inventory counting process. So previously what was done is the warehouse inventory would be counted all at one time, what you'd call a wall-to-wall inventory count that was done at the end of the fiscal year. The problem with that is that if you have a miscount or any kind of an error, you don't really have time to investigate where that material went to. It may have been legitimately used on a job, or you may have not been able to find it because it wasn't stored where you thought it was stored. Any number of issues. It could have been just a fat finger error on data entry or just a bad count, and somebody didn't count well. What we've done now is we've changed our counting process to what we call cycle counting, so that some portion of inventory is counted every month, so that ideally by the end of the 10th month of the fiscal year, you've counted everything. In addition to that, all of the high-valued materials, things that could have a significant impact on the bottom line if a shrink event were to occur, you find it sooner. So the high-value materials we're counting quarterly, and everything is being counted at least once per year. So if you think about that, the high-valued material is probably going to get counted 3 or 4 times per year. Everything else will be counted 1 time per year, and the counts will be done over a period of time, so you don't have to do it all at the end. So it's a slightly different process. We are also tracking reporting on inventory accuracy, both what we call gross and net inventory accuracy, which are important for us. Significant issues. We continue to focus on decreasing all discretionaries.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, significant activities. I'm interested in charging stations and electric cars, and
So am I. It's one of my passions. So we are installing 6 charging stations at the 1900 building for company vehicles. I've been strongly encouraging other departments with Michael's support to consider an EV anytime they need to make a passenger vehicle purchase. So we have 1 or 2 in the electric utility, and Code, I believe, has bought, 2. So it's growing. We're using the Chevy Bolt, which is a 215-mile range or so, and we'll be charging them behind 1900. We are also, Joel is working on this, putting in place an agreement, which will come to you for approval, to put some charging stations in various locations around the city to entice people to come here to charge. What I'd like to see is, and you'll see this in a later plan, charging stations at places where it'll attract people to come and spend some time shopping while their car is charging, or having lunch or dinner while their car is charging, or using the beach. So there'll be a limited number of charging stations there. So we're going that direction. Joel is going to bring that forward, I believe, in the next meeting or so.
Great.
We've postponed them a number of times because there were so many things on the agenda, and we were still ironing some things out.
little, I don't know, premature, but we're going to be talking about incentives for solar, or the consequences. When are we going to be talking about incentives for electric cars?
I'm talking with FMPA right now about getting a rate consultant on board. And this is a sensitive matter because we already have a rate consultant. But my feeling is that we need somebody closer to us geographically who can work with us much more closely on some of these items. So I'm sure our rates consultants are listening to this. They're probably not happy to hear that. But part of what we need to do is to be much more nimble in adjusting our rates to attracting and jumping on some of these opportunities, and understanding what the true cost of service is to provide that service to the customer.
So there'll be a separate meter for charging or how, anyhow?
Well, what we envision is in public locations, metered charging stations where customers would plug in and charge their vehicle and pay for it on a credit card. And those machines would probably be leased, so we don't get locked into one technology for a long period of time that we own, and the technology evolves beyond the point of us needing it. For home-based charging, off the top of my head, and probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'll say it anyway, our residential rates are so attractive relative to a gallon of gasoline and how far it will actually propel the vehicle. The cost per mile to drive a vehicle on gasoline versus the cost per mile to drive that vehicle on electric is substantially lower on electric, probably 30 to 40% of the cost. Plus, there are other benefits to the vehicle in terms of reduced maintenance and things like that. So I'm not sure that we need to provide an incentive for private residential vehicle charging beyond what our residential rates already provide.
Just to market that fact.
Exactly. We need to market that fact.
Thank you.
Right.
Commissioner Hardy?
Do you mind if I go back while we're still on significant activities? Sure. Okay, right when I came in, you were talking about the 7th Avenue substation. Where is that?
7th Avenue.
It's behind the 1900 building off of Boutwell, so it's east of Boutwell, but
Okay, all right.
there's a big empty lot there with a big radio antenna
Right.
behind the trailer parks and the little industrial section, 7th Avenue South.
That's currently closed right now, the Boutwell, between 2nd and 7th.
Yes.
North of 7th is closed, but between 2nd and 7th it's closed. But I know what you're talking about. Okay, there's another substation that we need to discuss that I understand is under design that's near 7th Avenue South, which is what I was thinking about. It's just
6th Avenue South.
Okay, so that's what you call, okay. Because it's in between 6th and 7th. That's why I was trying to make sure. Okay, all right. Well, we'll have a conversation offline about that then.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
No, I was just gonna help with the geography.
Okay.
7th Avenue South, or 7th Avenue.
Okay.
All right, let's move on.
Just trying to help.
So, significant issues. Continued focus on decreasing discretionary spending.
Thank you.
Continues to pay off. It's important to us. We're working the things that need to be worked. If there's an outage, we work it. If, for example, we need to fix equipment to restore our levels of reliability, we work the overtime to do that. So, encouraging staff, particularly if I catch wind of it, that anytime our reliability falls below what I call N-1, that we'll work overtime to restore the reliability to N-1 in that particular system or device, whatever component it is. So we are working the things that we need to work, and we're not working the things that really can wait. Recruiting is a significant issue. So we have just in the engineering / management ranks 4 positions that we've been trying to fill for a while. We've had difficulty getting the right individuals to be willing to come here. We're even having difficulty finding the people so we can begin that dialogue with them. So we're going to have to step that up and probably resort to more use of recruiters who specialize in finding those types of people for us.
Well, I understand there are different capacities and job loads and whatever, but when you think about recruiting, I mean, we've done our part in helping to try to, recruit and better salaries and things like that for certain positions that are harder to recruit in your department. But what about, I mean, when you sit there and talk about, like earlier today, saying the plant is finished and this, how do you recruit people for a job when you're speaking out publicly saying that?
They're going to know it anyway, and they're going to see it when they come here. And it's no secret that Lake Worth Beach has these problems. So, and we don't want to do a bait and switch on them for sure.
Right.
That being said, there are people who are at certain stages of their careers when coming to Lake Worth Beach is attractive, like it was for me.
Right.
So we just have to find those people. And it's easier for us probably to find them using recruiters who can work the phones nationwide to find somebody who wants to relocate to Florida and be a part of this experience.
No, I understand that, but I think that, and this is what Commissioner Hardy was alluding to earlier, when we just throw those things out there and that, to say that, and it's a fact, I understand that's a fact, I'm not saying that, but without having the bigger conversation along with it, what does that mean? Are we going to be retraining people for different types of positions when we make that transition? Are there going to be other opportunities available? I mean, I sort of think we need to have a holistic conversation about what happens next in either, in whatever decision that we make together, so that we can kind of just,
Correct. We actually teed that concept up during the recent negotiations.
okay,
I coined the phrase soft landing.
okay.
And we teed that up. It didn't go very far at the negotiating table, but that doesn't mean that we're not compassionate people and we want to get the most value for the people that we already have in the event that they're not needed at that plant down the road. Even if we built a new plant, it would require fewer people than the plant we have today. It wouldn't be zero,
Right.
but some of the folks could make that transition.
I just want to have that bigger conversation, maybe at a future meeting, so we can just kind of lay it all on the table, what it looks like, or what's possible, and what opportunities may exist, and what things might change, or what, just to have an open dialogue about it.
Right. So the IBEW has been very helpful in that regard. So, for example, power plant folks worked on the TPTL1 transformer replacement. They help us with some of the technology deployments that we're doing in the transmission and distribution system. Willingly, they jump right in. And interesting that as we increase the level of technology at use in our distribution system and transmission system, but particularly distribution, there's more need for more technical, hands-on people to maintain that equipment. So as one side is going to see a decrease in need, on the distribution side, we're going to see an increase in need, particularly in substation.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Solar net metering remains a significant issue. I'm not sure we need to go into a lot of detail today, and I know it's a work in progress. Pole relocation issues, particularly with AT&T, and I think I would be remiss in not singling them out for what we've gone through with AT&T. So if AT&T you're listening,
You're going to reach out and touch somebody.
yeah, you need to do the right thing in Lake Worth Beach. It's been very frustrating to get them to live up to their contractual obligations.
Aren't they right
particularly
here in our city,
We believe they are.
downtown?
Yes.
All right, why don't we just shut it down and tell them to get out?
I probably had to walk myself to HR a couple of times for threatening that.
Well, let me rephrase
And
that.
council properly.
Your services and equipment and whatever it is you're doing within our city limits are no longer welcome. Would you please remove and,
You're saying it kinder than I did, but it's been very frustrating. We had to engage all of the resources in the city, including our lobbyists in Tallahassee, to get the attentions of AT&T at the highest level possible in the state, to get them to do something that they've been giving notice to do long ago by council.
is it actionable?
Well, the particular issue is to remove their poles or their equipment off of Boutwell Road. So we gave them notice back in 2017 to do so. My understanding is they initially reached out to the city, but then they went radio silent, and we could not get anybody to respond for probably over a year.
Correct.
And so finally, we had to resort to every avenue that we could find, reaching out to multiple attorneys that we've been working with on the pole attachment negotiations, using our lobbyists to reach out to their head of Florida to finally get them to say, oh, yeah, we're going to get on that. With some of them responding that, oh, this is a surprise. We didn't know about this. And in fact, we had, documents and emails to them going back to 2017 on this issue. So it was extremely frustrating for staff, and it was looking like it was going to hold up the project. We finally got them to do something. I don't know what the current status is now, but it did take a lot of effort. What we can do statutorily is we can move their stuff off of the poles and then back charge them for our expense in doing so. But of course, that puts you at a disadvantage because now you have to bill them, and if they don't pay, then you have to go after them, whether it's through litigation or some other form. So ideally, you never get put in that position, but we were almost to that position of having to move it ourselves.
So if we were to take that drastic tact, what would that do to their ability to service? Would that inhibit their service capabilities in the area?
For the time being to remove it, but we would be responsible for reconnecting it. It wouldn't be a matter of taking their stuff off the pole and laying it on the ground. We would have, under the statute, the requirement to make sure that it was up and serving their customers. But we could charge them for our expenses for doing so, and that's by
Vice Mayor
statute.
Pro Tem, the other part of the conversation that's important to remember, because it sounds like we have a lot of leeway here, we run the risk of putting the businesses out there without communication services, and they would be the ones that would probably be impacted the most if something went wrong in that transaction. So
And I have
there's not a
Uverse.
clear shot here just because they're in our right of way. It's bedeviling, and this happens. It's not unusual. It's not uncommon. Everybody says we should act more like private sector. There's an example that we don't want to act like AT&T.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Well, this has been an issue, I brought it to Christy a long time ago, and I want to thank you for all your hard work on it. With the Palm Beach County League of Cities and the Florida League of Cities, we have a little bit more leeway because we own our own utility. If we did not, then we would fall into a different category, and we pretty much have no legs to stand on. But we're already having issues with our downtown merchants and our homes. I can't tell you how many people have to move from a different room in their house when they have AT&T because the service isn't working. The island of Palm Beach is going through an issue right now where they've asked AT&T to come in. And I talked to the mayor last week on the issue, and she said, we don't know that we're going to get anything from them, but we're going to get them in front of us. I suggest we do the same thing. AT&T has service center in the middle of our downtown, and we still don't have service. And I think we need to have a bigger conversation with them too. Just like Vice Mayor Pro Tem Maxwell said, does it mean we're going to take your service away? I agree with the city manager. It's going to affect our merchants, but our merchants are already affected. It's hurting their businesses because their computer systems are hooked up, and every time it goes down, when I get a call, I call your department, and it is not our fault. However, AT&T is standing there with the merchant saying it's the city's fault. So, I think we need to have a bigger conversation and figure out what's going on, because when we go to Tallahassee and Washington, when we presented to Marco Rubio, we said, the cities embrace the AT&T and the Verizons and the Uverse is coming through, and we embrace 5G. We want 5G for our people. But if the basic service is not working now, and you're taking it to larger cities aren't having a problem because there's big money there. But if the smaller cities are jeopardized, or the rural areas are jeopardized because the service isn't working, but then you want to give up our main, Lake and Lucerne and Botwell, and you want these huge amount of poles, you're going to have to work with us. We need to have a different conversation.
Mr. Robinson?
Can we legally notice the public that AT&T is not?
Playing well with others?
Well, the issue.
I mean, if you're thinking of changing a service, we can notify the public that they're not good.
I've
service.
received numerous complaints from downtown businesses about their Comcast service going in now too. I don't know. I mean, is there issues downtown specifically? Because that's what we see. But then I could say I have Uverse, and I could pick up my neighbor's Wi-Fi, but I can't get my own when I'm sitting in my house. It keeps going on and off, and I can't. But my neighbor's comes up, so it's pretty interesting. What do you is?
No comment?
No comment. Okay, Commissioner Hardy.
I was just going to say, as far as noticing the public, I think that's what the press is for. And I think there's probably a member of the press watching this. And if that member of the press were to be interested in writing about this episode, and it's probably
he'll
not
blame
just
the city.
us. Well, I don't want to presume anything, but if there's an issue with AT&T and we have documentation, we can obviously furnish that documentation to the press. In addition to that, merchants and residents can feel free to switch their service. If there's an issue with the way that AT&T is treating the city, and if they feel some pride about the city that they live in, and don't take kindly to multinational corporations treating the city of Lake Worth Beach in a way that's not fair, they can switch to one of their competitors and they can let them know that. In addition to that, If they feel that the service that they're getting isn't good, they can just switch. And you know, that's always an option. And so I just want to make sure that as we have that conversation, our residents and our business owners can always feel free to vote with their feet and with their wallets and with their pocketbooks.
What about the fact that, like I said, you know, I brought this to you several years ago about some of the downtown merchants and more corporate types of businesses that rely obviously on their internet service, law firms, different people, you know, that have a lot of, that need that connectivity, and they have issues, and it wasn't AT&T, you know, so just be that said. But again, with the headquarters of AT&T being right here, have we reached out to the local management leaders at the AT&T here in our downtown, since it's right there?
We've reached out to people all over AT&T, but we're unable to get a commitment from anybody to do anything until we got messages back from the people that we were talking to that you should see something soon. And this was after, you know, weeks or, you know, months and months and months. And then finally the eruption that took place, you know, on my part and other people's part about 10 days ago. So they then showed up, you know, the next day because we were ready to just run the bulldozers down the road because we had to.
But
And
did we show up on their doorstep, which is just steps away, is the question?
I don't think there's anybody to talk to there.
That's not corporate. That's just offices.
It's offices.
So we've been on with their counsel, outside counsel, inside counsel. We've been on with their salespeople, their lobbyists, the people who in theory are responsible for this could not get a commitment from anybody. And then they finally, some people reported, oh yeah, it looks like they're out there working. The additional glitch that we run into doesn't appear that they marked up the drawings when they were allowed to or supposed to. So as recently as the last few days, we have found additional infrastructure that's underground that was not supposed to be there, that is now in the way of the new drainage system. So we don't know if this is entirely AT&T, in all fairness. It might be them and or others. But there's infrastructure that was not pointed out by these telecom providers when these drawings were provided to them a long time ago in anticipation of this construction. So we're attempting to figure out whose infrastructure it is so that the right parties can be notified to get out there and move it, because now we're ready to put the drainage culverts in. So,
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
And I just want to make it clear that as we cross our T's and dot our I's, that people know that it is not the city of Lake Worth, that is other companies, whether it's AT&T or Comcast. You know, I want to thank the city manager and the IT department for moving the city from AT&T to Verizon after the hurricanes and the lack of communication in residents and things. So, you know, yes, people can switch. And I asked the mayor of Palm Beach the same thing. You know, people can switch, but when they've been with AT&T for years, they want the service. And, you know, I just want to make sure that they're not pointing the finger at us, because quite often the message I get is they were told by the service provider that it's on the city side. Exactly.
Long ago, you know, when does it finally go away?
Well, and again, it's money. It comes down to money. I get it, but you know, they have to upgrade their service. They have to do what's right on behalf of whoever's paying for it, and you know, it can't reflect back on the cities that they service.
We got you back.
thank you. All right, significant events, the last two, we did reintegrate, or in the process of reintegrating customer service back under direction of electric utility. So that's underway. So Franco has joined my team as one of my direct reports, and be working with him to help implement some of the ideas that he's had, initiatives he's been pushing, and work with the other departments in the city to see those things realized. And no surprise here to this group, HR leading the way for us did see a ratified contract with the IBW, which was good for us and good for them. I think that they're certainly better paid today. We helped close the gap between where they were and where the competition was at, to make it a little bit more attractive for those employees who have started their careers here, maybe been through the apprenticeship program here, to stay here long term. And certainly as we're looking to attract people from out of state, particularly the Northeast, Upper Midwest, to come to a warm place, they seem to want to come here now. I think maybe Walt can add to that, but I think he's seen some improved recruiting candidates already.
That is correct.
I've actually brought one gentleman in from New Jersey already. Has relocated.
Not
down.
another one, Ed. No.
Yeah, I can't get New Jersey away from me. It's the stink. You know,
What
so-
exit? What exit was that?
And then so I got him already, and then I have another lineman that's starting June 3rd, coming out of the northeast area as well.
This is
Con
critical.
Ed, yes.
Is the gentleman an Eagles or a Giants and Jets fan?
I do not broach that subject during interviews. It's after the fact that I do that.
And knowing the location he worked at, I would be surprised if he was anything but a Giants fan.
You know, we should see a different moratorium on this agenda for hiring Jets fans.
Hey, I resemble that remark.
All right.
All right, so going through the balanced scorecard, we'll be doing the financial discussion and the customer discussion, and we'll go through this quickly. So if we look to the far right, we see the variances to what was in the budget, and if you go a little bit left of that, a few columns, you'll see the variance to the prior year. So we like to track how we're doing relative to the prior year and relative to the budget. So the top portions are dollars related. So we'll talk about those. So residential sales are ahead of budget by $104,000. That's a good sign. However, commercial sales are $539,000 behind budget. However, if you look at it relative to the prior year, so if you go a couple of columns to the left there, you'll see commercial sales are about $158,000 below where they were last year. So not only did we not see the growth that we had built into the budget, but we've actually shrunk a little bit. That's not a huge number, but it's a number nonetheless on the commercial side, offset by the increase in sales right above it on the residential side. So residential is up 159,000 versus the prior year, while commercial is down 158,000. I should have always prefaced this by saying these are non-GAAP, these are not audited numbers. They're numbers that we pull out of the system for the purpose of these quarterly reports. The ones that really matter will be the end of year numbers that go through the audit process. But these are a good dashboard to have a sense of what's happening in the system. Pole attachment revenues are down. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've got fewer pole attachments. That might have to do with counts, it might have to do with timing. We've negotiated an agreement with Comcast, which hasn't come forward for approval yet, but to their credit, Comcast has agreed to start paying us the new rate effective April. So we're still finalizing some of the items in the contract with the help of our counsel's office and with Melissa, and we'll be bringing that forward.
Before we move on, can I just ask our attorney, so are we on line with, bringing all the providers up to date and,
Yes,
better contracts? We have contracts with everyone now.
that's what we're working towards. Melissa Anderson from our firm is working closely with Ed and his staff to negotiate those contracts and make sure, certainly the big one, the big two, AT&T and Comcast, we have a negotiated agreement with them where we're getting a good pole attachment rate moving forward. And we're also looking at other providers to do the same.
And the reason I asked, because a few years ago when I brought it up, there were lapsed contracts, we were missing contracts, so Christie's and her people moved forward with, trying to bring that all up to date, so thank you.
Yeah, a lot of it too was mixed in with the franchise agreements, which were sort of left over from years ago, and those have sort of phased out. But the pole attachment thing, Ed and his staff really found that that's where we were really hurting.
Great, thank you.
So the contract, when we do bring it forward, so like I said, in good faith, they're starting to make the new hire payment. We finalize the contract. There'll also be a retroactive, if you will, a settlement for prior years of underpayments. We've agreed on a number for that. So that'll be coming in as a one-time positive charge. We anticipate being able to do the same thing with AT&T. And I've got that on hold for the moment. I want to make sure that there's enough teeth in the contract. The AT&T contract is a little bit different because AT&T actually owns some poles in town, whereas Comcast does not. And the AT&T agreement is more of a joint use agreement as opposed to a pole attachment agreement. So we need to make sure that we have enough teeth in that contract to not be in the same situation that we were just in on Boutwell. that we have the latitude within that contract to do what we need to do. We've also signed a contract, which you all approved, with Crown Castle for small cell. So that's a good agreement for us. We did our research statewide to see what others were paying to make sure that we were getting deals that were current market type rates. I can't say that we're going to be the best, but we're pretty well up there and much fairer for what we should be getting for our infrastructure.
Ms. Mayor?
Now, you had mentioned AT&T had private poles. Where are there a lot of those? Are they, on private land?
No, a number of the poles in the city, and I would probably say it could have been as many as 10 to 15% or more at one time, were actually AT&T's poles. So on most of the poles, they're on our poles, but on a lot of poles, we're also on theirs. So it's more of a joint use type of thing. We use their poles, they use our poles.
And the poles that are along the railroad tracks, those big things, like there's one on the south end?
Those tend to be ours.
Okay.
Most would tend to be ours. Theirs would be much closer to the residences, I believe, and providing service to the homeowners.
How do they own a pole? Don't they have to own land to own a pole?
No, we have agreements with us to be able to put them into the ground.
But they're usually shared.
They're usually shared. I think it would be rare to find a pole. On day one, it would be rare to find a pole where they're the only ones on the pole. However, what can happen over time is if we need to put a new pole in for our purposes, because the pole is broken or it's weakened to the point where it needs to be replaced, we'll set a new pole, transfer our infrastructure over to it, and we'll cut the top of the pole off. They're the only ones left on the pole. It's extremely difficult to get them to come back, transfer to the new pole, and remove the old pole.
Will that change under the new contracts? Will it be a little easier, or do we have some teeth in the new contracts that will, give them a certain amount of time, or?
Some of that will be addressed in a new contract, but a chunk of it's going to have to be addressed in a new ordinance on how people with poles are allowed to behave in the city to eliminate the situation where they leave infrastructure like that and don't remove it and don't transfer.
So don't come bringing your poles around.
And also in that ordinance and or new contracts, would it cover things like on top of the Gulfstream Hotel, the privately owned pole contracts that we still inspect, or is that something separate?
Well, we just passed the revisions to the right-of-way ordinance, which covers a lot of that. What they put up on buildings, we also cover in other ordinances in terms of like what kind of telecommunication facilities you could put up on the Gulfstream or elsewhere.
And
We had that a few years back.
yeah, but as we move forward with 5G and new technology, is that something we need to look at again, or do you?
Oh,
feel-
yeah, we're looking at all those things and also we're getting requests from folks to attach to other city facilities with this 5G rollout. So we're looking at that and trying to make sure we leverage the city to put us in the best position to take advantage of what they need from us.
Great, thank you.
So total operating revenues, and there's some smaller revenue numbers there. And again, these are non-GAAP financials. We believe our revenues are down about 1.5%. Not that worried about that. Remembering that we did some time ago have the step downs in the residential rates, and we're hanging in there. We will see revenue grow up as the new pole attachments come in, and we begin to realize the revenues from the gas contract sale, things like that, and other things that we might do. So we'll see some revenues there.
And the final completion of some, commercial numbers being down, we had a stall in some commercial projects that we had anticipated being either on its way to being open or open by now.
Right, and we have some residential, a couple of residential developments underway.
Right.
Lake Cove is underway and growing, and I can't think of the name of the townhouse, the condos.
The mid,
And no, just behind on A Street, that group, and of course the
Banning
mid.
Court.
Yeah, right, and then the mid's coming along. Has taken a significant step forward, which is welcome news.
Yes, thank you. Projects not coming online yet might explain why revenue didn't grow, but I'm wondering why revenue actually did the opposite of grow. Do we have any insight as to, did we lose accounts? Did someone just get much more efficient?
No, we don't know. We looked at the number of accounts. They're very much even within 10 or 15 accounts. It doesn't it doesn't account for it. It's maybe within 9 accounts or something like that. We need to do that analysis to figure out where exactly that took place. Was it in the demand, commercial demand, or the regular commercial customer, and in what section of town was it? I'm more also looking at, while we shrunk slightly, but what element of growth did not occur that we thought was going to occur in the budget? So was it just the way that we budgeted? We got a little bit too aggressive.
Right.
But overall, financially, we're doing well because our expenses are down substantially.
Because
so
the variance to the budget is not small. The variance to the budget on commercial sales.
is large. Yeah, it's
Yes.
$539,000.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the other thing is, I happen to be on that social media platform, Facebook, and there was an IBW account that showed our workers at Banyan Court, and looked like they were working very hard to bring power to that area. Really happy. There are going to be 85 families there. That's load demand. Happy about that. So that would be some demand here in the city.
Mm-hmm. On the
Keep it going here.
yep, on the operating expense side, labor salaries plus overtime is down 4.3% below budget. Our purchase power cost, which is the big story, is down 21.2% below budget. I always remind folks that, remember, we had a little bit higher number put into the budget than we thought to come in at, because we were still negotiating the deal and hadn't locked in the final numbers. So
Just remember, on this part of the report, being negative is a good thing.
this is exactly. Exactly.
In case you're looking at those negatives on that report. Commissioner
And,
Robinson, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask about collections. Or is that going to be addressed?
We're not going to get deep into collections, but in the next slide, we will talk a little bit about the number of accounts that went into collections and the average. One of the things that I have tasked Franco to do is to really drill down on the collections and understand what types of accounts are causing it, and what efforts that we have. So what's not necessarily the social demographic, but what's the business demographic, if you will, or financial demographic of these accounts? Are they rentals? Are they single property owners? Are they occupant owned type of things? Are they commercial? If it is commercial, where in the city is it happening? Things like that.
So is there a number that you want to throw out there for that kind of stuff?
The total collections?
Yeah.
We run about $350,000 a year goes out for collections, is my understanding.
Never to be collected.
I don't know if it ever gets collected. I don't track that piece of it, but I know that we do have about $350,000 goes out. I'm not sure what portion of that does. My assumption is that it's not a big percentage of it, because many of those folks may be completely gone, and there's unless they were the homeowner, we have a lien on the property or something like that. I don't know how we're going to get it back.
Well, and Ed and I had this conversation a week or so ago about looking again at collections, because we had a little conversation here on the dais. But years ago, we moved forward with, some increases in, utility deposits, and we got a little pushback from that, but it seemed to work. And then we actually put a new ordinance out that we came after the actual landowner, because he is doing business and renting to people, so he should be responsible for that before he can turn his power back on. And that seemed to be capturing. But Ed and I were talking about, what are some of the larger accounts. I've made mention there was a vegetable market out west that we service, that actually they have a large account, and when they went out, it was about a large amount, and how many of those. So Ed and I talked about that, some of those things you can track, but I think at some point we need to bring it back to the dais and have a deeper conversation about, because like Ed said, once it goes into collection, it goes into a different, what is our collection and what percentage, and can we do better there? So I think it's a bigger conversation. We need to come back like we did a few years ago.
Mr. Hardy?
That amount, do you just write that off as bad debt expense, and if it comes back, it comes back?
I don't do the write-off. That would be the finance department would handle that, and I don't think they've actually written it off, but I have to defer to the finance director.
If it gets carried over.
So I'm wondered as to how, it's accounted for. You know,
Line
typically,
item.
yeah, you know, like typically if you have, you know, some sort of account receivable and it's not coming in, you would just say, okay, this is bad debt, and you mark it up as an expense. And if it comes back, it comes back, fantastic. But it's just something that you recognize in the year in which it occurs that, okay, this is an issue.
I'm familiar with that. I just don't know how it's done here in the city in the finance department and how they do that.
Okay. And then the other
That's
thing
not
is,
something that we would do in the utility. That would be a city finance decision.
sure. And then the other thing is, you know, we're always trying to balance, and you know, I as we're talking about the balance scorecard, you know, we're always trying to balance, right? And so I think one of the reasons why there's probably some pushback about deposits was because it keeps people from coming into the city, and it's a deterrent from people moving into our jurisdiction. Whether you're a business owner, you know, I've heard a business owner downtown who's prominent talk about, you know, deposits and things like that, or whether you're a resident, it's something that we've kind of been known for. And so I wonder what as we have that conversation, I would like to obviously look at what our competitors, even though we don't really compete with them, do, but what the other people who provide power here in the state of Florida do, and how they handle that, and whether or not we can duplicate that without compromising some of our other objectives as far as growth and development here in the city. And business activity. It's a discussion that we should have. I agree with Vice Mayor Amoroso.
I started a discussion with Franco on that, and my understanding is that we use a third party to do some scoring for us on the customers and then put them into various tiers, and then based on policy decision, depending by tier, that sets the level of deposit that's required by the customer. And then there are some triggering events that might cause that deposit to be raised. For example, if you've been disconnected or lost power, or not paid your bill, rather, been late, that might cause your bill to go up.
And even a bad bill with another carrier.
It could.
Move now, yes.
It could. It's an area where there's room for exploration, room for discussion, and certainly room for optimization. But it is balanced because it does have an impact on that business owner who may be struggling to get by and now has their deposit stepped up, which certainly protects the utility. But in the long run, does that help or hurt that business? So it's more of a policy matter that we have to really have a thorough discussion on.
And FPL is not, for example, FPL is not in a position to have to worry about, you know, how the economic climate is in the cities where they're operating. FPL is worried about FPL. Because they're a completely separate entity, or, you know, Duke Energy is worried about Duke Energy because they're a completely separate entity. Here, we're one of the same, and the things we do on one hand affect the things that we want to do on the other, and vice versa.
And the difference.
So I don't envy you guys at all, because it's a tough decision.
Right. And the difference in, you know, for policymakers is that in our world, that shortage of funds that are available in the event of a default on the part of a customer isn't oh shucks, I guess the shareholder doesn't get the earnings that they expected, right?
It's paid by everybody.
In here, it's our neighbors, right?
Correct.
It's the folks that we go to dinner with, our kids play with, and live across the street from us. We all share when that customer defaults and doesn't pay us.
Absolutely.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I think we should have, you know, a review of what our current policy is, but as I recall, and Ed, you rightfully stated, we have a third-party vendor who screens customers. And the system we put in place several years ago, I think, was a pretty sound system in terms of making sure that the deposit that is charged, be it residential or commercial, is commensurate with the utilities that are going to be expended or used on a regular basis. I think it would be very helpful for us. And by the way, I'm just going to take on a leap of faith here and say, based on what I'm seeing here in numbers, our numbers are drastically less than they were back in the day when it was the freaking wild, wild west around here with utility.
$7 million.
I mean,
it
I think
millions.
back in the day, I think every residential customer, I think, had a $150 deposit, whether you had a 25-foot lot with a little cottage on it or you had a McMansion. Your deposit was the same. Now you tell me, does that make any sense? Not at all. So we changed that. Okay, and the way this system works is if somebody does default, the company that we're employing is linked to virtually all of the utilities, major utilities throughout the United States. So if you or one of us defaults in Lake Worth and goes across the border to FP&L, or they go to West Penn in Pennsylvania or whatever, they're going to get flagged for having beat Lake Lake Worth Beach out of money, and they're gonna have to pay back Lake Worth Beach before they can establish utility service somewhere else. That's a nice feature. What I'd like to see though, and I think would probably answer a lot of our questions, is if you could generate either a quarterly, maybe a quarterly report, just account number, amount of deposit, and how much they didn't pay. Because if I can see if they had a $400 deposit and they defaulted at $300, we've covered our risk. That's what I'm concerned about. Are we covering our risk in terms of deposit?
Well, that was how we made the decision.
Exactly.
Originally.
Exactly. And as long as we're covering the risk, and the deposits are compensating for what we're losing, then, we're, I think, in pretty good shape. You're always going to have some folks that are going to default for a number of reasons, and that's just part of life on that side of the counter and part of business on our side of the counter. But is that possible to generate a little report, just the account number, how much the deposit was, and how much was outstanding that caused the service to be interrupted?
Vice Mayor?
We could do some work on that.
And I just want to go on the record, your utility department, 7 years fast forward now, is phenomenal. And they go above and beyond. I hear over and over, they helped me with this. They moved me through this. They allow customer service. They've allowed me to, I was late, but it was the first time I've ever been late, so they allowed me to, play catch up. They go above and beyond. We're not talking about those people. We're talking about the bad players that are walking away with a lot of money. Same thing with downtown merchants. I've heard from downtown merchants where, it was a bad summer. I was a little late, but they allowed me to make payments. They put me on, as long as the conversation is there and they're working with them, that's, so, they're doing a great job down there.
I just want to make sure that there's good policy behind that so that it doesn't someday blow back at an employee
Yes.
who says, hey, why did you, treat Johnny better than Miranda?
But they still need
so
to
that there's
have
good-
a little bit of that give and take, because
Yes.
again, it's just like code. We don't want your money. We want you to come into compliance. We don't want to turn your utilities off. However, there's a cost of doing business.
Correct. So jumping ahead, energy delivery side, we can see that I'll just go right down to the last two lines in the energy delivery: wholesale power received and solar production. So we've actually increased the amount of power that we've sent to our customers by 1.6%. So we brought more power into our system than we did the prior year. So that means it's going somewhere, and probably, hopefully, going to our customers, right? At the same time, our solar plant has produced 1.1% more. So we're getting more power out of our solar plant than we did in the prior year. We're bringing more wholesale power in. Our residential customer base went up by 2.8% in terms of its use of power. The commercial customer base did, unfortunately, shrink by 4.3% in its use of power. So we're tracking this more closely than we have in the past to see what sectors are performing or growing or not performing. So we're looking at it. Degree days, that's one of the indications of increased use of electric, right? And, so we say, hey, versus the prior year, we're up 2.2% on degree days on a year-to-date basis. Amount owed at disconnect.
The bottom
Yellow,
left, yellow,
page 4.
degrees there.
Oh, I see now. Okay, sorry.
Our collections numbers are not hugely different. November of last year, we had 64 accounts going to collection. This year we had 64 accounts going to collection. $2 more per account. Very, very close in terms of what's happening on the collection side. Amount owed at disconnect, at time of disconnect. This time last year was $195. Amount owed disconnect this year is $167. So we've gone lower in terms of how much money people owe us at disconnect. And just because it went into disconnect doesn't mean it went to collections. They may have had a deposit to cover it. The number of customers though is gone down slightly. So 426 were disconnected in March, 413. We'll also be adding some year-to-date numbers on this, so we just don't look at monthly snapshots, but year-to-dates. Reliability numbers, we're putting the numbers up. What we don't have yet are the comparators, so not a lot to tell here. The comparators, are what the other FMPA cities came in at. We've had some months where we're in the top quartile, months where we're in the third or fourth quartile. Overall, some of our indices are staying the same, some are getting better, and some are getting worse. Remember that we're now comparing a good year of data, 2018 with scrub data, to 2019 good scrub data. So we have a good basis of comparison year to year. We continue to see that few outages take out many customers because of the way that our circuits are configured, and part of the system hardening and reliability improvement project is to begin to sectionalize those. So as we move forward, it's going to take time. We'll wean ourselves off of that situation. So this will mean a lot more when we get the FMPA data and fill that in. We get it on a monthly basis if you want to see it, but we'll be rolling this up for you quarterly. Streetlights, probably the most important thing there is in March of 18, we're now tracking streetlight availability on an annual basis or monthly basis and then year-to-date basis. So we were at 96.6% last year, which is the first year we actually started tracking it. This year we're at 98.5 for the month. Year-to-date we're at 97.6. That means that 97.6% of the streetlights that we're responsible for are operating. And we have a list of the ones that are not. I get that list every 2 weeks and what the status is on repairing them. We also track how long it takes to repair a streetlight. So some get repaired very quickly from the time that we know about it. Some take a little bit longer, but we're averaging about 7.3 days to repair a streetlight after it's called in. So that's way too long. I've given the team a target of 48 hours. Some companies use 72 hours. The point is to have a stretch goal and measure progress towards it. So the good thing is that we're measuring it, we know it, and we're much better than where we were 2 years ago. I can tell that because I get far fewer calls from you folks than I used to. Either that or the telephone number change has helped.
No, it's
an AT&T phone.
Question.
but it's still 7 days.
Tampering events do continue. We're showing that the tampering events have decreased. What that means, though, is that the ones that we know about have decreased. Right? We're always on the lookout for tampering events, and Joel, to his credit, and the rest of the team do identify probably one every other month or so. We probably had 3 or 4 already this fiscal year. And we do get a chunk of that money back.
Go team.
Customer disconnects, you can read through all the data, and of course the solar net metered shows what the growth in that customer segment has been. And in the last page is just a definition for you, of a reminder of what those reliability indices mean, but without the comparators doesn't mean much right now. But good thing there is that we are tracking the data. It's good, solid data. It's quality, and we're able to benchmark ourselves against other FMPA cities. And at the end of the year, we also do a benchmark to where FPL, but that usually takes a while for FPL to produce their numbers, turn them over to the FPSC, and then they finally get published. We can extract them and we benchmark ourselves to the Palm Beach area, West Palm Beach area.
Streetlights. What is the reasoning that it's taking so long on streetlights? Is it lack of people?
The biggest delays are in the spare parts and some of the more complicated ones that we inherited from either the Village of Palm Springs or the Palm Beach County lights, or DOT lights, if you will.
So that might be something that we look at down the line, that, if we're getting a lot of this outage, that we try to get that stuff in and keep it in stock.
Correct. It's expensive, and we've had a task on our list of things to do was just to review the Village of Palm Springs contract to make sure that it adequately covers our true cost of servicing that contract. Okay. So we're looking at that.
And then on streetlights, I've gotten a few calls recently about adding new streetlights to certain areas that we might have missed, or for whatever reason didn't get under the Siemens contract. Is that something we can do? Do we have that ability? Do we have poles laying around? I know at one point we had some extras. Do we still have that?
Yes, we do have some extras, and if there's a consensus that we need to add a light, we will add a light.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Robinson?
I just want to thank you and your team for good presentation and the efficiency that you're operating at. It's fantastic. Do you have any complaints about the Siemens contract?
That's the next meeting. That's the next meeting.
We'll address that
Okay.
There are some concerns, but
Sorry, I
we'll
asked.
address that at a future meeting.
Okay. But anyhow, thank you.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Ed, for your presentation. Well done. Meter tampering. Any anecdotal information of anybody got zapped in the process of tampering with their meters that we know of?
We haven't heard of any injuries from doing that, so it is indicative that the folks who are doing it know what they're doing.
I thought. And street lights, just to follow up on street lights. I know we have some situations, some occurrences where folks can't afford a time at the shooting range, so they just decide they're gonna take pot shots at the street lights. Do we have different hardening devices we can use in more troubled areas? In other words, we have a standard cover or whatever we use for the light, and do we have like a different type of a cover so when people shoot the damn lights, they can't knock out the lights?
I'm not aware of any, but maybe we're providing a public service if it does absorb the bullet as opposed to having it ricochet and go someplace else. But I that's not my area. I'd have to defer to law enforcement on that. But
Well,
but certainly we can investigate more.
Well, so the answer is no. We only have one type of
That's my
lens
understanding.
cover
Yeah.
or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
and that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
Is it so?
Bulletproof glass?
Well, no. I mean, this is silly. I mean, I've heard stories, instances where they shoot the doggone light out. You go, you fix it. They shoot the damn thing out the following week. You know, so what the hell's up with that? You know, who's the fool here? Us or the idiots with the gun?
That's what I said, bulletproof glass.
Did you ask that question?
What is that an appropriate question? I don't want to go out there and change the doggone pole out every week because some idiot with a gun has got nothing better to do with their time. Frankly, maybe it should ricochet on them. Did I just say that out loud?
You are.
I'm so bad.
Point of order.
Well, no, seriously. I mean,
I would just be concerned about where else it might ricochet, but I recognize that sucks when people do that, and we do look like fools. It's like, when you have a cat who you tell, don't stop, and it's about to clearly push something off the coffee table,
it does anyway.
We've all seen those videos online. My question is about the street lights. In particular, I've spoken to a lot of people downtown who say that the downtown is darker than it probably should be, both on the avenue and on the side streets.
Especially on the side street.
Right.
Light pollution for you.
And so if there's a first place that we want to look at putting more street lights or gathering consensus about street lights, I think the downtown might be a place where we should discuss having more lighting. And that'll be the only thing that I'll say on that. I am eager to get to the rest of the agenda.
Me too. Let's move on to public participation of non-agenda items and consent agenda items. Anyone have any cards? This is for non-agenda items and consent agenda.
I have no
Seeing there
cards,
are
Madam
none, we shall move on to consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move on to new business, 7A, resolution number 15-2019, moratorium on new net metering program participation. Who shall lead the conversation?
There would need to be a motion.
I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
There, we got a motion by the Vice Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by the Vice Mayor. Thank you.
So we brought this forward for your consideration. We currently have a net metering program. However, after looking more closely at the state regulations, we realized that we're not in compliance with the state law in that we don't have interconnection agreements. So the same legislation, if you will, that brought forth net metering to the state also required interconnection agreements. We're not aware that the city has ever had an interconnection agreement of any kind with customers who install these systems. Not sure why. And talking with people that were here when it started, they don't know why it wasn't done either, but we've never had one. The only thing that exists are, if you will, permits that are issued for construction or installation of such systems, which go through the various city permitting agencies, whether it's our own city, the county, or the Village of Palm Springs. So the rest of the state, I haven't found, by the way, any utility that does not have an interconnection agreement. As far as I know, we're the only ones, and they're quite standard in terms of what they address. We just don't have them. So we need to put those in place. So we need to create them, and council is familiar with this, has already started to look at it, and has probably started some work on it already. But we need to create interconnection agreements that are ours, and get those ready to go. This has nothing to do with the rates that people pay for the excess energy that they produce or put back to the grid. It's not about the pricing. It's about having these interconnection agreements in place.
Okay, I just want you to repeat that if you can. I just want to advise my fellow commissioners that this is not a discussion about rates, correct?
Correct.
Or pricing.
Correct. It's not a discussion
Okay.
about rates or pricing.
So-
And it's not a philosophical discussion either. We're required by law to, in fact, have interconnection agreements, and we don't.
Okay. Commissioner Hardy?
When did we learn that we didn't have interconnection agreements?
I don't have the precise date, but I think we came to that realization probably about a month and a half to 2 months ago. And we began to put up the discussion of that we've got issues that we need to deal with within that metering program. So that might have made it 3 months ago.
Okay.
And we then teed up that discussion here, and it was suggested that we pursue it with the UAB.
Does drafting these interconnection agreements require commission action?
No, it does not. Not that I'm aware of. It'd be like asking your permission to comply with the law, right?
Right. Are there examples of other interconnection agreements that we could draw from as a template?
Absolutely. I know of the only utility that doesn't have them.
How difficult, therefore, would it be for us to come up with an interconnection agreement or different interconnection agreements that might work for this utility?
Well, it requires some time and attention to understanding the ones that are out there, looking at the parameters that they cover, and make sure that we cover similar parameters here. For example, my preference would be to have interconnection agreements that are very similar as possible to our neighboring utilities, so that for the betterment of the contractor community and the customer community that might want to do this, there's some consistency and not necessarily much more difficult to deal with Lake Worth than it would be anyplace else. There ought to be some consistency to it. That's my own personal belief, and that's what we would strive to do.
Would coming up with these agreements take 9 months?
9 months? No, no. The agreements can be put together in less time than that, but there's some time to get ultimately the agreements approved, and then to get the customers to sign them.
Are you talking about new customers or customers existing that we have to get these interconnection agreements with?
Existing customers.
So the moratorium wouldn't be about existing customers, it would be about future customers.
Correct. The moratorium would apply only to people who have not yet begun the permitting process.
I'm just, if we've had 3 months to do it, I'm wondering why, if it didn't require any commission action, why didn't we just say, okay, this is something we got to do like now? Within the last 3 months.
Well, it's part of a larger discussion on what we need to do to bring this whole thing forward, that we needed to do this. So, and we were given guidance to go to the UAB and take it up with the UAB.
The drafting of the interconnection agreements?
The entire issue of net metering and interconnection agreements was but one section of the document, and one of probably a dozen plus questions and matters that we were going to take up with the UAB. That is now.
I guess I'm wondering, why do we need a moratorium to draft interconnection agreements when we could have been drafting interconnection agreements from the moment that we figured out that we needed them?
Well, we've actually started drafting some agreements and doing the research on what needs to be in those agreements. What we need is more time to complete them, get them approved, and then get the customers who are already out there net metering today to sign them.
But
in the meantime, we
those
also
customers who are already net metering aren't really relevant to a moratorium, which affects future customers.
correct, but we have customers who could be planning to install systems and coming in who we have no ability to control the size of their systems
True.
that they're installing, none whatsoever.
True.
And then what do we do with them?
Right. I'm just wondering why.
So we have customers today who are installing systems whose systems are oversized, and more, we believe, likely to come because we have no way to limit the size of their systems. So it's a policy decision. From our perspective, we leave it to you. If
I can understand.
it's a policy matter.
Yeah, look, I can totally understand. We're supposed to have these types of agreements. We don't have these agreements in place. Holy crap. Okay, so we gotta figure out, what these sorts of agreements should look like in the city of Lake Worth, and we want to do that as quickly as possible. We've had 3 months to do that. You want us to put a moratorium on future net metering because apparently we don't have these interconnection agreements, and it's apparently about absolutely nothing else. I just wish we had been able to do this within the
I'm not
last 3
asking
months.
you to do one or the other. I'm raising this as a policy matter. What would you like to do, and we'll execute accordingly.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. You brought up an interesting point that I wasn't aware of when you mentioned that folks were putting in oversized systems. Well, why would somebody put an oversized system in?
I would assume because it's financially lucrative under our current rules for them to do so. That's an assumption, though.
An assumption, so you think that it's possible people are putting in oversized units so they can make some money on it? Is that what you're saying?
It's certainly possible. I'm not,
Thank you, that's all I need to know.
Well, I just think that it's being here for as long as we've been here to come here. I mean, it was the Wild West 7 years ago, and we put policies and procedures into place in places that they should have been legally, by ordinance, by law, by this, by that the city just never did. And this is one of those cases that we don't have a system in place that allows people to take advantage of the system, and which is taking advantage of the taxpayers of this community. More than my biggest concern is public safety in regards to it, and how they're permitted, how some of them are permitted. You don't have an inspection, you don't have there's concerns that I have in reference to that as well. I think that if we're following the policies of other cities and municipalities, that we have to have some sort of policy in place to do it, let's do it. The thing that I don't want this to be is a disincentive to people for solar. I would want it. I know the moratorium calls for 6 months. I'm sure people are anxious and already have money down or are planning to put money down on. I don't want to disincentivize solar or be any detriment
3 months.
to solar in any way, shape, or form. But I want to protect us. I want to protect our taxpayers. I want to protect them physically, emotionally, financially, in their taxes and everything else. So I want to do the right thing, but I don't want this to be oh my gosh, look what they're doing to solar. I mean, I could just see the headlines in it tomorrow. And we fought to build a stinking solar farm in this community and to switch over our usage in our own recipe for power in this community by being proactive and progressive when it comes to renewable energy, and are committed to be 100% renewable in many ways here in the city. So I don't want to hear any of that rhetoric going on around it. No, I'm not talking about for my commission. I'm saying out in the community that we're not pro solar. We're bigger pro solar than any other city in this
Been doing it for
county.
years.
We've been doing it for years. So I want to make sure I lay that out as big and bold and beautiful as I possibly can, because I don't want to hear that conversation. But I do want us to protect our taxpayers. I want us to protect their livelihood and their finances. I want us to put a good policy in place that takes care of everything. Anyone that's trying to milk the system and create a mini power plant on their own property, I'm sorry, but you can't do that. You know what I mean? That's just not. We have to have a system in place that protects everybody and everything, and also, we're in a business in the electric utility too. Let's not forget that, and we have to protect our best interests in business too. But I think following along the standard procedures and policies that other municipalities have created in regards to the eventual conversations of rates and pricing and things of that nature, we should follow along those lines so that we're being competitive and we're still being incentivizing the use of solar within our community. Commissioner Robinson?
I absolutely agree with everything you said. I just don't agree with the 6 months requirement.
Well, that's where I was
for-
going to.
Yeah.
That's where I was going. Thank
Well,
you for reminding me.
And you said everything else I want to say,
Need
Can
6
we-
months, we come back early.
well,
Well, what,
Can we
why
come
do
back
we,
early?
well, let's put,
It's our ordinance. We did
let's
it.
talk about an extension rather than coming back early. So I would be in favor of a moratorium. We've already known about it and should be working on it for 3 months. 3 months is a long time since we're working with a standard, the standards of everybody else, aren't we?
Man, yes, but we're also going into budget. There, staff, this is not the only thing staff's working on. And I think the main part is he's trying to make sure that people sign off on it. People actually they work it, they do it, and then people actually sign off on it. So it comes back as a package. That, if we have 40 customers have signed the documentation.
Well,
I agree with you. What about 4 months?
what do we do
I'm
with
dealing.
people? What do we do? What do we do with people who don't want to sign off on it?
That's another conversation that
Yeah.
we're going to have.
Well, that's certainly a policy discussion, but I can tell you that has happened in other utilities. If you don't sign, you're not in the program.
That's part of the standard.
Right, that's what's happened elsewhere. You would have to give us direction on what you want done here, but that's what's done in other places.
And that,
Madam Mayor?
Well, one at a time, please. Commissioner Robinson has the floor. Let him finish, please.
Can you provide us with a few standard contracts or whatever?
Yes, I have some with me tonight. Happen to be our neighboring utilities, and we're looking at those very closely, but certainly.
Well, can we start this so that it doesn't take 6 months? Can you provide us to start the policy thought process anyhow?
Certainly, we can provide those copies to you
And
of
then-
what neighboring utilities are doing, what their agreements look like.
And then why
And
don't,
and by the way, they're not secret. Anybody can, and the audience can, I'm not saying you have to go do this research yourself, but they're on the web. They're on their website. You can get to them.
just as soon rely on your
Yep.
research.
And
But,
we'll make copies of these and get them to you.
well,
But they're
then,
publicly available for everybody.
so then why don't we give ourselves a couple weeks or a month to look at those standard contracts and then come back and talk about a moratorium of what we think we need, which we being you, instead of putting just a stop work process for 6 months. I in no way want to be perceived as being against solar, like you said. Thank you.
Madam City Attorney, could you help me out here? If someone wanted to suggest a moratorium different from 6 months to say 3 months, as someone who has not made the motion, I can make a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor that's been seconded.
Yes. Okay, so right now, the motion on the table is to approve the resolution as written, and as
Right.
written, it's a 6-month moratorium. If you want to make a subsidiary motion or superseding motion to amend the motion on the table, you can do so. You would need a second of your motion to amend. There would have to be a discussion and then vote on that motion, and if approved, it would amend the original motion. Then we would have to go back and vote on the original motion as amended. So that's the Robert Rules of Order process if you want to make a motion to amend a current motion that's on the table.
Right. And if we wanted to
Practice.
not have a 6-month moratorium, which would mean 9 total months of us thinking about this policy, and if we wanted to, make it 6 total months of us thinking about this policy, because we've been thinking about it for 3 months apparently already.
Well, the moratorium is, maybe to just clarify, is proposed as a 6-month moratorium for us to do 3 things. To draft the agreement, to then bring that agreement forward for you to make the policy decision on that agreement, because as Ed mentioned, one of the issues you're going to have to decide on is, are all the participants in the program currently going to have to sign off on that agreement? And if that's the policy decision, then once that agreement's adopted, and keep in mind, we're looking at perhaps 3 standardized agreement based on different tiers or the size of people's systems. Once those agreements are adopted, then we would propose during the moratorium going to the participants currently in the program to have everybody sign off on that, so that we know we've got everybody signed off, or they're out of the program if that's the policy decision. So then the moratorium ends and we've got a program in place for new participants to come in where we've got the standardized agreements. All of our current participants have signed up to that agreement, and we've got a solid program going forward.
What I don't understand is why we need to limit new participants from coming in after we've drafted some interconnection agreements in order to go back to the participants who are already in the program.
I think part of the thought process to it was
Like,
so
is
that
it necessary?
it sort of the thought process was that if there are any bumps in the road that are discovered once that agreement's adopted and we ask the current participants to sign off on that agreement, those bumps in the road could be figured out before we start letting new participants come in who we would then require to sign off on the same agreement. Because what we don't know, because we've never had an interconnection agreement, is truly what is out there with all these systems that have been authorized by other jurisdictions. And so part of this, I think, is going to be discovery process of having everybody sign off these agreements and for us to fully understand each person's, system that's connected to our system.
But if these agreements exist elsewhere, don't we have the opportunity to see the bumps in the road because they've already been experienced by our peers?
There's going to be tweaks to
I mean, we
it.
don't
We
have to
can't
reinvent
just
the wheel.
wholesale adopt an FPL interconnection agreement, and we can't necessarily wholesale adopt an FMPA agreement, because I can tell you from my standpoint, from a legal standpoint, we're going to craft these agreements so they're specific to protecting the city of Lake Worth Beach.
But as far as all of the things that might crop up,
Ideally,
I
yes.
can't imagine that there would be something extremely unique that would crop up here that hasn't cropped up elsewhere.
Commissioner,
No, and hopefully so. But I think the idea was give us time to get those 3 tasks covered so that as new participants come in, they've got a clear interconnection agreement that they have to sign before they can start the program. And we know that everybody who's currently participating has done so. And going forward, we have a solid program in terms of complying with Florida statute, with both a net metering program and an interconnection agreement. And that's what we're really looking to do to put the city in the best position going forward.
Let's
I mean,
get some public input. We've got
I
some
can
public
add a little bit to that too. That we don't know what we don't know. These systems were inspected by others. We haven't been inspected in accordance with interconnection agreements ever. We don't know what we're going to find when we have out there, and obviously people have installed systems believing that they were operating within the rules or within the rules to the extent that they existed. We don't know what we're going to find. Without a moratorium, very large projects could come through the door tomorrow.
I agree we need a moratorium. I'm sorry.
So
Yeah. The question is the length.
Vice Mayor?
I just wanted to make a comment. I don't need to see those contracts because those are not the contracts we're going to have. And that's a lot of times what sends the wrong message out there, that all of a sudden there's a contract, it's in, an email, it's been forwarded, and it's not what we're using. I'd rather, and we're not going to approve that until it's in its final stage. So I'd rather see exactly what you and the attorneys come up with for Lake Worth Beach. And then that's the actual, at any time, people can go online and see what FP&L has and what other people have. But, I don't need to see that because that's not what we're going to be approving.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
If you don't mind, let's go ahead and go to public comment. I have comments, but I'd rather wait. at
Okay,
this point.
yeah, we
Everybody
can
else
still
is-
chat afterwards.
I just wanted to add one more thing from my own perspective in this business. I think there's a sentiment in the community that because I raised this issue, because we brought this up, that I'm somehow anti-solar. I'm not saying that's the position there, but I know that position exists in the community, in that view. It's quite the opposite. I'm very much pro-solar. I have consulted for clients as a leader or co-leader of a company that I worked for that was in the business of developing solar projects, and have probably recommended solar to no less than hundreds of customers in the Northeast, and have led the development of a number of projects in the Northeast. Both were private entities, for United Technologies Corporation, for example, and worked for utilities which were heavily invested in solar. So I'm very much pro-solar. My concern here in raising it was that while net metering is a good deal and a fair deal, that's policy in this country, virtually in every state that I'm aware of, the program that we have here is disproportionately beneficiary relative to the customer base. And one of the things that is missing is these interconnection agreements. Regardless of what policymakers decide to do with the rates down the road, this is something that has to be put in place. And oh, by the way, as we discovered, I was surprised to find out that we did not have them, and it is in fact required by law. So this had to be brought to the table, had to be addressed. And the folks sitting behind me, some may be pro, may be against, people listening on TV, I'm not anti-solar. We just need to have the right program in Lake Worth. And you as policymakers need to know what this very well-intentioned program has evolved to and where it could go to if we don't put some of the basic elements of everybody's net metering program in place.
Yeah, but he's anti-pool.
Would you stop it? I'll kill you.
Thank you.
All right, let's, I'm sorry, Commissioner
Okay.
Robinson, did you have something? Or
Well,
was it just
certainly the size of, when Commissioner Maxwell mentioned the size of people's systems, that issue is in the other agreements, the standard.
Yes.
Those are in there. And I then also want to say that, no, your interest in solar is an interest in Lake Worth, and your interest in the bottom line is your interest in Lake Worth. And I want to thank you for both.
Me too. Ramsey Stevens, followed by Peggy Fisher.
Good evening, Your Honors. My name is Ramsey Stevens, and I live at 618 South K Street, and I am a newly appointed member of the Utility Advisory Board. I would just like to encourage you to maybe consider not having a moratorium for a particular amount of time, because that does risk interrupting our narrative that we have here as a city, as a progressive city, as it relates to clean energy. But also, it does risk interrupting meaningful economic development activity that this program is supporting right now. But instead, consider putting a moratorium on projects that don't have an interconnection agreement. You could do that without having a set period of time. You could then say, okay, any more projects that come through have to have an interconnection agreement that this commission, the city attorney, the city utility administration approve. And you could then come back and say, hey, have we templatized that and gotten it done, in a normal amount of time without interrupting the underlying market? And you could let the advisory board finish helping you address the broader issues about what you want this policy to actually look like long-term for the city. That is the norm in a lot of utility markets. You don't have to templatize your interconnection agreement. You have to templatize what is your rate. You have to templatize how big the system can be, all those things that we know we need to address constructively here. But you can say to the contracting community, to the development community, just bring us your interconnection agreement, and then we will say, hey, this passes the test or it doesn't, and you don't interrupt the market. So I hope that's taken into consideration, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Peggy Fisher?
Peggy Fisher, 508 North A Street. I'm also a member of the Electric Utility Board, but I'm not speaking in that capacity. I'm speaking as just a resident of Lake Worth Beach. I would ask that you all do a little bit of maybe looking into why the city, for 10 years after a law was put in place at the city, we have not abided by that law. And also if it presents any fines for the city not to have abided by law for that long. You talked about being here for 7 years, Mayor, and addressing lots of things. Well, it's been on your plate. It's been in your alleyway for 7 years, and it hasn't been addressed. As far as the interconnection agreement, I think you're going to have some people who, if you say either you sign this or you're withdraw from the system, I think that's a little harsh when the city has not done their due diligence in having these agreements that were required by state law. And we didn't do that as a city. to say to them, well, you either reduce your system, whatever it is that they have to do, or you don't get to participate. We need to realize that part of the position they are in is one we allowed those customers to be in by not having this agreement, by not having these details laid out. We, as a city, have sort of allowed this to happen. You know, we've allowed these systems to be whatever they are that exist right now. So we need to take responsibility for that. I mean, I hope everybody will work together. I think solar is very important, but I do think that as commissioners and as leaders of the city, we have to realize that we have had a part to play in where we stand now.
I think bringing it forward is exactly what we're doing when we learn of it. And I assume that the city attorneys probably, when they created this program, I think when the cities created this program, how many years ago was it?
2009.
In 2009, the then city attorney should have advised them that there was a state statute that needed to be, that's why you have city attorneys. You know, and then we relied on utility directors to let us know of these things. And probably, you know, we weren't actually really diving into utility funds until recent years, or having access to utility funds in recent years. We can attest to that, some of us fellow commissioners up here. And we don't know everything. We had an electric utility advisory board for 7 years that didn't know it either. We all didn't know it. So we're learning it now, and we're trying to deal with it together. Not against each other, together. And that's pretty much. What did you have to say? I'm sorry.
I have nothing.
What was what Mr. Stevens brought up? What is the possible? What is I missed?
I don't fully understand his proposal. We would need to vet that.
I didn't understand it either.
I can elaborate.
I did.
Sure. Hold on one second. Vice Mayor Pro Tem, did you have?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think I can hold my breath.
He's the only light on.
Yeah, I don't think I'll hold my breath much longer. A couple quick questions. City Attorney, when in 2009 did we enter that agreement? Or the
In 2009, the program was started. I don't believe we had anyone connect till 2010 to the system.
You sure about that? Because I remember one resident had the solar sanctuary. Remember the?
We were not
I'm just
representing the
kinda
city at that
curious.
time, so I'm not
Okay,
sure.
Understood.
We can verify that.
And Ed, tell me, how many people do we currently have in the boat that are currently existing with
Approximately 82, I believe.
82? Okay. So let me go down my comments. And they, in some part, mirror what Ms. Fisher said, and in some part, mirror what the mayor has just said. First of all, anybody who thinks that we're anti-solar just arrived this afternoon to Lake Worth Beach, because this town has done nothing in the last 7 years, or 10 years, that I've been around, but move in the direction of finding alternative sources of energy and creative ways of, taking care of the environment. So if you're out there and you're listening and you think this is about anti-solar, I beg to differ with you, as the mayor said earlier. The other question I have, Ed, is when the state brought this statute into law, was the interconnect agreement part of that statute then, or did they add it after the fact as like a glitch bill to fix that original bill?
Council can correct me on this, but I believe it was in there from the beginning.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
it was.
Which leads me to my next point. Again, if you just arrived at Lake Worth Beach today, we welcome you. We certainly welcome you. And as you look around and wonder about this, that, and the other thing, we hope that you'll, engage us in a robust conversation, because we want to help create the context of why you see some of the things that you may be seeing. But I will tell you that when this was adopted, and I dare say that I probably was not part of that, because I came back to the commission in November of 2009, and I do not recall voting on this, and the solar sanctuary was already in place. Point being, I'm quite sure we didn't get the proper legal representation when we rolled the program out to begin with. We were not told or informed that we were supposed to have an interconnective agreement with any potential folks going forward. So over the years, we've demonstrated over and over and over again with the new administration, the new city manager, and bringing in new personnel, management personnel in all of our departments, we uncover rock after rock after rock after rock of things that may not have been done as well as they could have been done in the past. And this is an example of a rock being overturned and something being found that we need to address, and we're addressing it. Okay? Now, as far as the time limit or the moratorium is concerned, you know what? We need to do this right. We want to do this right. And it's not going to make a hill's worth of beans worth of difference to anybody thinking about putting in a system if they have to wait for a couple more months to get their system. I really believe that. So for us to horse trade up here and think, well, should we have 3 months, 4 months? Do we do this? Do we do that? This is silly. We need to rely on competent staff to advise us on how to fix this glitch, how to fix what we found underneath this rock. If they need 6 months and they fix it in 2, I'm quite sure they're going to come back and say it's fixed. You know, we can lift the moratorium and we're off to the races. I'm quite sure, I think the commission would probably agree with me on that point. So let's not try to be subject matter experts to the point where we want to redirect this initiative too much. I think we should stick with staff's recommendation with the 6 months, let them fix what they need to fix, reboot if you will, put everything back in place the way it is supposed to be according to state statute, and then everybody will be whole going forward. And we can deal with the folks, the 82 customers, you know, as we need to deal with them going forward. Those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
City Manager, what did I ask you? Christie, what did I ask you today in the meeting? Number one, what the comment that I made was 6 months is a half a year. When you're planning something, a project in your house, and you've set forward the momentum to do a project, a half a year sounds like a long amount of time for something that you've been planning or queuing up for a project in your house. I completely side with staff in reference to all the matters and procedures and the way in which they want to go about things. I'm completely on board. I just don't know, and the only reason that I'm saying this is I just don't know if, with all the publicity I'm sure we're going to get over this that's wrong, it's going to come out about this whole thing.
It's going to come out wrong.
It's going to come out wrong. I don't want to offer an initial half a year ball and chain on our leg to it. And people say, "Oh, see, they're making us stop doing." I was just using it as a mechanism to say, okay, if we do 3 months and we can extend it if we don't get the information, you know, and extend it to a 4th month or a 5th month if we need to, and it still hasn't, we haven't gotten the information queued up the way that we need to. But could the moratorium be for a 3-month period and then extend it if we don't reach it, rather than saddle ourselves publicly with 6 months right off the get-go and come back and do it? Because I'm sorry, just the way government works, sometimes I just fear
Well,
run
Madam
out
Mayor,
the clock at 6 months just because it ran out. You know what I mean?
Madam Mayor?
Let me just have the city manager answer.
just to clarify a couple of things, in section 6 of the reso, you have an early termination with 6 months being the longest possible. And if we are able to bring a resolution in and get everything corralled and through, we can bring it in before that period of time. 3 months might be short, 4 might be a better compromise.
That's what I was
But-
initially thinking
But
for.
to the point that Vice Mayor Pro Tem Maxwell said, that if we have something already through, we're not going to run the clock out. You'll have that commitment from me. We'll go ahead and bring it to you. And it says right here, once a resolution is adopted, this moratorium then is over. Is that correct, Madam Attorney?
That since we're doing this by resolution, I mean, most of the moratoriums that y'all normally see are by ordinance, which require 2 readings to end the moratorium. This is just a resolution, because this addresses the net metering program that's in the annual resolution that we adopt for the electric utility rates.
May I make a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor from 6 months to 4 months?
You didn't make the initial motion, though, did you?
I can make a subsidiary motion or a superseding motion.
Superseding motion,
Correct.
And
you have
someone can second that, and then we can discuss whether or not that's prudent.
yeah. Okay.
Why is the motion superseding?
It's by Robert's Rules of Order, and since our rules of procedure don't specifically address a motion to amend a motion that's on the table, we default to Robert's Rules of Order, and under Robert's Rules of Order, you can make a motion to amend in a superseding motion. It has to be seconded, can be discussed, then it can be voted on. If it passes,
Simple majority or super majority?
it's simple majority.
So a simple majority, somebody could amend a motion.
Correct. Or you can do a friendly amendment, which is typically the process that if you ask the original maker of the motion and seconder to say, hey, would you guys be open to a friendly amendment to the original motion? And if the original motion maker and the person who seconded agree to that, you can just do it friendly, or you can do it by more formal superseding motion to amend.
Friendly is good.
I've always directed towards the friendly amending of motions, but rather than the superseding of motions, just to get someone to remove it and to do it. But if you choose to do it that way, it's okay. But I would like to make one comment while we're doing this, and I find it really Jim Dandy that we're following all these Robert's rules of procedure. The most important rule of procedure is actually speaking when you're spoken to and not speaking out of turn and taking 1 to 2 passes at things. So if we're going to follow to the letter these Robert's rules of procedures, let's remember the very basic ones. And when you can follow those, then let's supersede everybody. But you do what you want to do. Go ahead. We've got the motion on the floor in the second.
Who seconded it?
Yes, we do have a second for the original motion.
Right.
Original motion.
Commissioner Maxwell made a motion and it was
Okay,
seconded by Vice Mayor
So
Amoruso.
There's a motion.
You can ask.
my question, so I guess I can ask the person who, I can either make a motion to shorten it from 6 months to 4, and someone can second that, we vote on it, and then we vote on the original motion, which has then been amended.
Correct.
Or I can
Ask the person.
ask to make a friendly amendment, which is basically I'm asking
For their
Make a
consent.
motion.
okay, the person who made the motion, which is who is the
Commissioner
person?
Maxwell.
Commissioner Maxwell, would you mind changing your motion from 6 months to 4 months?
I'll just say that I think it's really senseless to do this. I want to rely on staff's, competent advice, and I'm going to stick with my motion. But thank you for asking.
I therefore make a superseding motion. So I just want to acknowledge the person who made the original motion does not accept the friendly amendment. The only way, therefore, to get it from 6 months to 4 months is for me to make a motion and for someone to second it.
Second.
Okay.
Second. All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries.
So now the original motion on the table has been amended to approve the resolution, but to change it from a 6-month moratorium to a 4-month moratorium.
Correct.
So now that is the motion on the table.
Okay.
And I would hope that you would, I know that you, with the 2 nays on there, would just know that we're basically doing the same thing, but from a different perspective, simply from the appearance to the community in regards to the type of publicity we're probably going to get in regards to this. I'm allowed to say what I believe to be true, and I believe that it's going to be that, and I'm trying to do my best to stop that from being a black eye in our, and we'll always give staff the time they need to get the job done the right way professionally, even if at an extension. But I would just, Vice Mayor.
And I just wanted to comment, I understand where you're coming from, but if you watch social media, if you've already seen social media on this issue, it's already been that.
I know.
So you're not changing that perception. It's already got 5 different legs that isn't true. And for us not to stand behind staff is concerning to me. And at any time, this could have been changed or talked to staff about why they needed 4 and tried to get 4 with staff prior to this. But to bring it here is concerning to me.
I would like to address that because it's directed towards me, and I did address that in my meeting with staff today.
Madam Mayor.
And and nobody got back with me on it.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, hold on 1 second. I've had lights up, and I'm going in the order in which I got the lights up. Vice Mayor Pro Tem, and followed by Commissioner Robinson, and then you, sir.
Couple of things. Again, I want to stand by staff's professional recommendation and restate what I said earlier. Anybody that thinks that this is an affront to being progressive, which is one of my favorite words, in terms of energy conservation and green technology.
Transparency.
Yeah, the transparency.
One at a time,
That's a
please.
good one, too. But that's not the case, okay? And it pains me that oftentimes we sit up here in the interest of, sometimes you might want to call it someone's perceived perception of what the public might think. We need to rely on our professional staff to give us good guidance. There are already provisions in this resolution that provide for the opportunity to cut the moratorium short when they get the work done in a shorter time frame. I would much rather do that than have to come back in 4 months for whatever reason. God knows we could have a hurricane, between now and then, and that would really set us back. And then we have to get an extension on the 4 months. So with that being said, I also want to comment about your comment about the Robert's Rules. I think we do need to take a look at Robert's Rules, and we need to go back to Robert's Rules in terms of how many opportunities we each have at a bite on a comment, how a motion is made, who gets to speak first, the whole 9 yards, because this is just a free-for-all. It continues to be a free-for-all, and all it does oftentimes is wear each of us out sometimes and cause tempers to flare, and we're supposed to be a congenial body, and I think we are. But we are also 5 very passionate individuals about how much we love this community, and it serves the public no good purpose for us to bicker back and forth. That's all I have.
Great. Commissioner Robinson?
Is there anything that you see now in all the standard other contracts that Lake Worth would be anything different? I mean,
I don't see great differences, but we need to look at it a little bit closer and have the electrical engineers look at it to make sure there's no nuances to our system electrically that would be different.
I just two other words I want to use is fairness. That we're talking about fairness to everybody, and we're also understanding that progressive energy sources are subsidized in some way. There are a lot of government initiatives that are subsidized in some way or another, and that we need to be accepting of subsidies.
So to that end, this doesn't address anything like that. This is merely about the electrical interconnection, and there are some.
Which is going to cover rates, though.
Right. No, the electric interconnection agreement does not touch rates.
Then we're going to have a discussion on.
Correct.
There's be a separate discussion on rates down the road. This is about the electrical interconnection, the ability of the device to connect to the system, and how that system can be sized.
Okay.
And there are some insurance and liability indemnification clauses in typically in these agreements.
Fairness.
And we're concerned about the safety of the equipment and safety of the people. We have 82 systems today that, other than their initial code inspection, we have no idea.
So are you going to be, after tonight's passage of this resolution, are you going to begin inspecting all these 82?
No, we have no right to do that until we have an interconnection agreement.
Well, then I certainly want to do it sooner rather than later. Okay, I'm done. I'm ready to vote.
The only thing I'll say is, any one of us may choose to bring these issues up with staff in private, or we may choose to bring these issues up with staff in public, or both. It's really a matter of our individual styles, and I think it's really important to understand that the public is not in our one-on-one meetings with the city manager and with our meetings with staff members. And so sometimes the rationale behind things needs to be fleshed out in public. And one of our functions is to publicly justify the actions of this government, right? That's like the whole purpose of democracy, right? And so the other thing, as to our form of government here, it is not our job, the elected representatives of the people, to stand behind staff. It is staff's job to stand behind us, the elected representatives of the people. And so while I recognize that we do want to trust staff, I love staff. We got qualified, awesome people here. Okay, I talk about Ed to my students. Okay, because we've got great staff, but that does not mean that we accept unthinkingly, at least not in public. We might be thinking about this stuff in private, but that doesn't mean that we accept without going through that process the things that staff wants us to do. It's okay, and it's not uncongenial to challenge and ask staff to justify their rationale behind stuff. And so I because it was brought up, I thought I would address it. I'm ready to vote.
I just want to ask the city manager one question. I bring up, when I have meetings and you hear, when I do speak on things, I talk about my conversations that I had with the city manager and staff. And then I come here and say, okay, staff informed me that X, Y, Z, and therefore I'm voting this way. Staff informed me of X, Y, and Z. I disagree with this, therefore I'm voting whatever way. So when we talk about both the two conversations, the issues tonight plus the Robert's Rules thing, I would like us to get back to a place where we come here and say, I had a discussion, I did all my research, I did whatever, I'm here today to say I am against this or I am for this. And then you go and you have a pass at it, you have maybe a second pass at it, and then you're done and you make a decision on it. Rather than this, every time I get an idea, I'm going to say it. Or every time I have a thought, I'm going to think it, and I'm going to think it out loud. You can have those thoughts, and sometimes I've changed my mind sitting right up here getting information from all of you that I didn't think of in my conversations with staff and whatever else. So I get that. The most important thing to me right now, city manager, is when I had that question for you and Christy, city attorney, I asked you if you would speak with Ed.
And 4 months is,
And I asked, do you think 4 months would be enough time? Do you think if we needed to compromise time, would 4 months be enough? And he said,
it's your decision. I'm going to tell you that 4 months is fine.
Ed, did you say 4 months is fine?
We'll do the best we can in 4 months, but we can't control everything. We'll have to draft these agreements, bring them forward for your review and approval, then go out to the customers who are affected and attempt to get them to sign. And at the end of the 4 months, come back and report to you where we are. Of course, we would probably keep you updated along the way, let you know how that's going, so it wouldn't be a surprise.
Right.
But
is it something that when you got asked that, did you think, ugh, and I got a dagger in my chest and that would really stink?
well,
But-
I don't have any personal emotion to it. I just think about the amount of work that has to be done and all the other things that we're trying to do.
Right.
I mean, this is certainly the most important thing of the last hour, but there's a million things that we're doing in managing the utility. Not just us, but also Office of Counsel that supports us and is actually going to do the vast majority of the work in drafting this, and we'll be going back and forth. But if you look at the amount of time that we have to draft an agreement, or the tiers of agreements, whatever works out to be, bring them forward to this body, have you then approve them
Right.
with all the notice provisions that are required to do that. 4 months is not a lot of time to do all of that, and then get out to the customers and explain to the customers, I haven't even thought through that. How do we explain to the customers that this body has voted that they will sign these things, and what instructions are going to come with that, and what interactions are going to happen with the customers when we ring the doorbell and say, here, you need to sign this. I can't anticipate that. I don't know.
Well,
So-
we don't even know if 6 months will be enough time. Or it could be 2
Right.
months that's the right time.
Well, what I can say is we'll begin work on it, and we'll do the best we can, get as much done as we can in the 4 month period, and keep you posted along the way and how that's progressing.
There you go.
And we don't, if you give us an instruction, we don't take it lightly. We'll do what we can to do that, but recognizing that we're woefully short of staff as it is, and we've got a lot of things to do. So.
So
but we-
your real
we-
answer to that is no, you'd prefer 6 months. What you recommended in this ordinance.
Recommendation.
Right, we asked for 6 months, but if you need us to do it faster, we'll
you're not
see what,
concerned
but
about
I can't. I'm sorry?
The inspection, you're okay with the safety aspect of the installations that are done? I would have thought.
I have no idea the condition of those systems. I know that they met some code inspection when they were installed. I have no idea what inspections or maintenance those systems have received since then. I have no idea.
What's going to trigger an inspection of those systems?
The interconnection agreement requires annual inspections.
The longer.
So the interconnection agreement has to do, and then they go out and inspect. So that's after the interconnection agreement. And all.
Question.
Vice Mayor?
Real quick, on that inspection, so they've had an inspection by our code department, but they.
A code department, it could have been
A
ours,
code
Palm
department.
Springs.
Okay, so, but they haven't had a professional inspection, to the best of your knowledge, somebody that is a specialist and knows what they're looking at.
Correct. My assumption is that big assumption that they were, since if they went through the code process, which we believe the 82 did, they probably had a licensed electrician who did the installation because they went through the code process. But what's happened since that process was finished, we don't know. And certainly not an electrical engineer looking at the intricacies of an interconnection agreement, has looked at those things.
But
So
we would bring a professional engineer or electric engineer that is looking for those liabilities on behalf of the ratepayers.
correct. We will probably have to find a resource that can be dedicated to go do these inspections annually.
And again, that can't even happen until this interlocal agreement that we've got a 6-month moratorium on is completed.
No,
and then-
4 months.
4 months. Well, now that's on the floor. Okay. All right, we've got a motion on the floor in a second. All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 3-2. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second,
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
just at the end of happy hour.
Sorry for your loss.
Okay.